The email wasn't meant for me. It was a forwarded chain, a casual oversight from Robert's assistant, but it ripped through my carefully constructed world like a stray bullet, leaving a gaping, silent wound. My name is Michael, and at 32, I thought I had it all figured out. Senior analyst at Stone Go, a prestigious investment firm nestled in the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan. 5 years married to Jessica, my college sweetheart, a woman whose laugh could still make my day, whose presence felt like home. And Robert, my boss, a senior partner, a man I admired, who had taken me under his wing, a mentor who felt more like family. We had dinner at his place. He came to ours. The lines were blurred, comfortably so. That morning, the city hummed outside my office window, a symphony of ambition and relentless motion. Inside, my world had just stopped. The subject line was innocuous enough. Follow up on Q3 projections. But the body of the email, a reply from Jessica to Robert, was anything but. Last night was intense. Still thinking about that view from your penthouse and our little secret. See you at the firm dinner next week, darling. Try not to look too guilty. The words swam before my eyes, each one a tiny, venomous sting. Intense. Penthouse. Our little secret. Darling. The emoji, a winking face, felt like a personal insult, a mocking gesture from a ghost in my own life. My breath hitched, a cold, sharp pain seizing my chest. It wasn't just the words, it was the casual intimacy, the shared understanding that vibrated between them, a frequency I had never been privy to. My first instinct was a primal scream, a desperate urge to smash my monitor, to tear the office apart. But I didn't. My hand, surprisingly steady, moved the mouse to close the email, then deleted it from my inbox, and then from my deleted items. A clean sweep. No trace. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my shock. My vision blurred for a second, the polished mahogany of my desk, the framed photo of Jessica and me on our honeymoon, all dissolving into a meaningless haze. Then, a strange calm descended. A cold, hard shell began to form around the raw, exposed nerve of my pain. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze fixed on the ceiling, but seeing nothing. Darling. The word echoed, a cruel, mocking whisper. How long? How could I have been so blind? Robert, the man who championed my promotions, who praised my work ethic, who shared a scotch with me after closing a big deal. Jessica, my wife, my confidant, the woman who promised forever. The betrayal wasn't just a crack. It was a chasm, swallowing everything I thought I knew. I felt vulnerable, exposed, like a raw nerve. But that feeling, sharp and debilitating, quickly began to recede, replaced by something colder, more contained. My mind, trained for years to analyze complex market data, to spot patterns, to predict outcomes, began to work, not on stocks, but on them. Every interaction, every late night, every business trip suddenly replayed in my memory, filtered through this new, horrifying lens. The subtle glances, the inside jokes I'd dismissed as office camaraderie, the way Jessica would sometimes linger a little too long when Robert was around. They were all pieces of a puzzle I had been too trusting, too naive to assemble. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my eyes scanning reports, but my mind was a whirlwind of calculations. I observed Robert in the hallway, his usual confident stride, his easy smile. He caught my eye, offered a nod. "Morning, Michael. Big day ahead." His voice, usually a comforting rumble, now grated on my nerves. I managed a tight smile in return, a mask I didn't know I possessed. Later, I saw Jessica's name pop up on my phone. A text, "Hey, honey, thinking of you. Dinner at 7?" I stared at it, the words hollow, meaningless. I typed back, "Sounds good. See you then." The lie tasted like ash. The vulnerability was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was now encased in a hardening resolve. My thoughts shifted from the emotional wreckage to the strategic implications. This wasn't just about my marriage, it was about my career, my reputation, my entire future. Robert held my professional destiny in his hands. Jessica held my heart, or what was left of it. I couldn't afford to react emotionally, not yet. I needed data, I needed a plan. That night, Jessica greeted me with a kiss, her lips soft against mine, a familiar gesture that now felt like a violation. She asked about my day, her eyes bright, seemingly innocent. I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for a tell, a flicker of guilt, anything, but her face was a perfect canvas of normalcy. It was then, as she smiled and turned to set the table, that I realized the true depth of their deception. They weren't just having an affair, they were living a double life, and I was the unwitting audience. And, as I watched her, a chilling thought solidified in my mind. The game had just begun, and I was no longer a player, but the silent, calculating architect of its end. The next morning, the city's relentless pulse felt like a personal affront. Everything was the same, yet irrevocably altered. Jessica moved through our apartment with her usual grace, humming a tune as she prepared coffee. Her laughter, once a melody, now grated, a discordant note in the symphony of my shattered trust. I watched her, a phantom limb of affection aching where my love used to be. My face, I hoped, was a perfect mask of normalcy, a slight tiredness perhaps from a late night at work, but nothing more. The coffee tasted bitter, a reflection of the bile rising in my throat. At the office, Robert was his usual charismatic self, commanding the room during the morning strategy meeting. He clapped me on the shoulder, praising my input on the Q4 projections. "Michael, excellent work. Really sharp." His touch felt like a brand, his words a mockery. I nodded, offering a tight, professional smile, my gaze unwavering, analytical. I saw the subtle shift in his eyes, a momentary flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Perhaps a fleeting assessment, a check to see if I suspected anything. Or perhaps it was just my paranoia, painting shadows where there were none. I had to be careful. Every gesture, every word, every silence was now a potential clue, a piece of the puzzle I was meticulously assembling. My days became a meticulous exercise in observation. I noticed how Jessica's phone was always face down, how she'd sometimes excuse herself to take calls in the other room, her voice hushed. I saw the way her eyes would dart to the clock when Robert's name came up in conversation, a subtle impatience, a readiness to change the subject. These were not grand, damning revelations, but tiny, almost imperceptible tells, like micro-expressions on a poker player's face. They were the subtle signs of a lie, woven into the fabric of our shared life, now glaringly obvious to my newly awakened perception. One evening, Jessica mentioned a new restaurant she wanted to try, a place with a rooftop bar. "Robert actually recommended it," she said, too casually. "Said the view was incredible." My heart gave a cold lurch. Penthouse. View. The words from the email echoed. I feigned interest, asking about the cuisine, the ambiance, all the while cataloging the information. It wasn't a direct confession, but it was a confirmation, a small, almost careless slip that tightened the knot of ice in my stomach. The anger, initially a volcanic eruption, had cooled into something far more dangerous, a precise, surgical instrument. It wasn't about rage anymore, it was about leverage, it was about control. My mind, usually occupied with market trends and financial models, now ran complex algorithms of betrayal. I began to construct a timeline, cross-referencing Jessica's girls' nights out with Robert's late-night client meetings. The patterns emerged, stark and undeniable. The occasional weekend trips she took with her friends, always to places Robert also had business engagements. The gifts she received, always attributed to a thoughtful friend or a spontaneous purchase, now seemed to carry the faint scent of his expensive cologne. I started with small, intelligent actions. First, I subtly adjusted my work schedule. I began arriving earlier, leaving later, often coincidentally, crossing paths with Robert as he arrived or departed. I observed his interactions, his demeanor, the subtle shifts in his routine. I also made sure to be busy during certain times, creating plausible deniability for my own movements. Next, I turned my attention to the digital realm. I knew Robert was meticulous, almost paranoid about his digital footprint. But people, even the most careful, leave traces. I had legitimate access to certain shared company drives and calendars, part of my role as a senior analyst. I started reviewing meeting logs, not for my projects, but for Robert's. I cross-referenced his travel itineraries with Jessica's vague mentions of her own plans. It was like sifting through sand for grains of gold, tedious, but potentially rewarding. I wasn't looking for explicit confessions, but for patterns of opportunity, for the logistical framework that enabled their deception. One afternoon, while Robert was in a long board meeting, I found myself alone in our shared executive floor. His office door was slightly ajar, a rare occurrence. My heart hammered, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was it. This was the opportunity. I knew his assistant was out for lunch, and the other senior partners were all in the same meeting. I walked past his office, then casually doubled back, pretending to check my phone. I glanced inside. His desk was immaculately organized, but on a small side table, next to a framed photo of his family, was a leather-bound journal. It looked out of place, too personal for an office. My breath caught. I knew it was a risk, a monumental breach of trust, but the cold, analytical part of my brain screamed opportunity. I hesitated for only a fraction of a second. The image of Jessica's winking emoji, of Robert's casual darling, flashed in my mind. The pain, the humiliation, solidified my resolve. I slipped into his office, my movements fluid, silent. My fingers brushed against the cool leather of the journal. It wasn't locked. I opened it, my eyes scanning the elegant script. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was a series of coded entries, dates, initials, and cryptic notes. But one entry, dated just a few days before the email, stood out clear as day. J, penthouse, view, unforgettable. My blood ran cold, then hot. Unforgettable. The sheer audacity, the brazenness of it written down in his own hand. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conquest, a trophy. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a surge of icy, controlled fury. I quickly snapped a few photos with my phone, ensuring the lighting was right, the text legible. I closed the journal, placing it back exactly as I found it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I exited his office, my face a mask of calm, my mind racing. I had the proof, not just an email, but his own words, a tangible piece of their deceit. It was a game changer. But what to do with it, how to deploy it? The promotion meeting was still weeks away, a ticking clock. I needed to ensure maximum impact, maximum devastation. As I walked back to my desk, the weight of the photos on my phone felt immense, a secret weapon. I knew then that the next move had to be precise, calculated, and utterly unexpected. I had changed the board. Now I just needed to decide when to make my move. The journal entry, J. Muster, penthouse. View, unforgettable, was a cold, hard stone in my hand, a tangible piece of their deception. The initial shock had given way to a chilling clarity. My mind, once a battlefield of raw emotion, was now a meticulously organized war room. The photos on my phone were not just evidence, they were leverage, a silent weapon I was preparing to deploy with surgical precision. My objective was no longer mere exposure, but a complete, undeniable dismantling of their carefully constructed world, executed within the corporate arena they both held so dear. My plan began with a subtle shift in my professional demeanor. I became more reserved, more focused, almost clinical. My interactions with Robert were impeccably professional, devoid of the casual camaraderie we once shared. I was a model employee, exceeding expectations, delivering reports with an almost unsettling efficiency. This wasn't about being noticed. It was about establishing an unassailable professional foundation, making myself indispensable, and in doing so, subtly highlighting any perceived inefficiencies around me. I started to strategically over-prepare for meetings, anticipating Robert's questions, often providing data points he hadn't even considered. My contributions were always precise, data-driven, and irrefutable. I would present my findings with a calm, almost detached authority, observing the subtle shifts in Robert's posture, the slight tightening around his eyes. He would commend my thoroughness, but there was a new, almost imperceptible tension in his praise, a flicker of something akin to unease. He was used to being the smartest man in the room. I was now subtly challenging that perception, not with aggression, but with undeniable competence. At home, the atmosphere was a delicate dance of feigned normalcy. Jessica continued her routine, oblivious to the silent storm brewing. I found myself observing her with a detached curiosity, analyzing her habits, her expressions, her subtle tells. She'd occasionally ask about my long hours, a hint of concern in her voice that I now recognized as a thinly veiled attempt to gauge my emotional state. "Everything all right, Michael? You seem preoccupied." I'd offer a vague, reassuring answer about a complex project, a new client, maintaining the illusion of a dedicated, albeit stressed husband. The irony was a bitter taste. My next move involved a calculated manipulation of information flow. As a senior analyst, I had access to various internal communication channels. I began to accidentally CC Robert on emails that, while innocuous on the surface, contained subtle references to ethical conduct, corporate governance, or the importance of maintaining professional boundaries. These weren't direct accusations, but rather carefully curated articles or internal memos that, to an innocent eye, would seem like standard corporate fare. To Robert, however, I hoped they would serve as tiny, persistent pricks, a constant low-level hum of anxiety. I also started to subtly question certain decisions Robert made, not in an insubordinate way, but with a precise, analytical approach. Robert, regarding the Q4 projections, I noticed a slight discrepancy in the risk assessment for the new acquisition. Have we fully accounted for potential conflicts of interest in the due diligence phase? My questions were always framed as seeking clarification, as ensuring the firm's best interests, but they were designed to make him pause, to second guess, to feel a nascent sense of scrutiny. I watched him, his usual unflappable confidence now occasionally punctuated by a fleeting frown, a moment of hesitation before he dismissed my concerns with a practiced wave of his hand. Jessica, meanwhile, began to exhibit her own subtle signs of stress. She became more irritable, her patience thinner. She'd snap at minor inconveniences, her eyes often distant, lost in thought. I noticed her checking her phone more frequently, her fingers hovering over the screen as if debating a message. One evening, I casually mentioned a new internal audit policy that was being implemented, focusing on executive expenses and potential conflicts of interest. Her reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, her eyes widening for a split second before she quickly composed herself. "Oh, really? That sounds thorough." The forced casualness was almost comical. The anger that had once threatened to consume me had now transmuted into a cold, exhilarating sense of power. I was no longer the cuckolded husband, the naive employee. I was the puppet master, pulling invisible strings, watching my unwitting subjects dance to a tune only I could hear. Every subtle shift in their demeanor, every flicker of unease, was a confirmation that my silent strategy was working. I was dismantling their composure piece by piece, eroding their sense of security, all without uttering a single accusatory word. The corporate environment, with its intricate web of power dynamics and unspoken rules, was my perfect stage. I began to spend more time in the office after hours, not just working, but observing. I noticed Robert's car leaving later, sometimes returning briefly after Jessica had gone to bed. I documented these patterns, not with anger, but with the meticulous precision of a scientist. Each observation was a data point, strengthening my case, refining my strategy. I was building an unassailable narrative, one that would expose their betrayal not as a personal vendetta, but as a calculated breach of trust, both marital and corporate. The promotion meeting loomed, a date circled in red on my mental calendar. It was the culmination, the moment when all my carefully laid plans would converge. I had ensured my own professional standing was impeccable, my contributions undeniable. I had subtly undermined Robert's unshakable authority, planting seeds of doubt about his judgment and ethics. And I had watched Jessica's composure fray at the edges, her guilt a palpable if unspoken presence. The night before the meeting, I sat alone in my study, the city lights twinkling outside like a million indifferent eyes. I reviewed my notes, the timeline, the subtle pieces of evidence I had gathered. The photos of Robert's journal entry were still on my phone, a silent promise of the impending storm. My heart was calm, my mind clear. The emotional vulnerability was long gone, replaced by a gelido resolve. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed facade of their lives would shatter, and I, the silent architect of their downfall, would be there to witness every single shard. What do you think will happen at the promotion meeting? Share your predictions in the comments below. The air in the boardroom was thick with anticipation, a palpable hum of ambition and corporate maneuvering. The promotion meeting, the culmination of months of strategic positioning, was finally upon us. Robert sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his usual confident smirk in place, occasionally glancing at me with a proprietary air. He believed I was his protege, a loyal soldier in his corporate army. The other senior partners, a mix of seasoned veterans and rising stars, observed us with keen interest. I sat opposite Robert, my posture relaxed, my expression neutral, a calm before the storm only I could perceive. The presentation began, a meticulously crafted overview of the firm's Q4 performance and future projections. Robert spoke with his characteristic blend of charm and authority, highlighting my contributions as key to several successful initiatives. He was building me up, setting the stage for my promotion to senior vice president, a move that would solidify his own power base within Stone Go. He was, in his own mind, orchestrating a triumph. When it was my turn to speak, I rose smoothly, my voice steady, projecting an aura of quiet competence. I walked the partners through my detailed analysis, presenting data with a precision that left no room for doubt. As I neared the end of my prepared remarks, I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Then I deviated. Before we conclude, there's one final critical aspect of our firm's integrity that I believe requires immediate attention, I stated, my gaze sweeping across the faces at the table, lingering briefly on Robert. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The room grew silent, an unspoken question hanging in the air. I projected an image onto the main screen, not a financial chart, but a photograph. It was a close-up of Robert's leather-bound journal, open to the page with the damning entry. The words, stark and undeniable, filled the screen. J. Penthouse. View. Unforgettable. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Robert's face drained of color, his jaw clenching. He started to rise, strangled protest forming on his lips, but I cut him off, my voice calm, authoritative. This entry, dated, insert a plausible date a few days before the email discovery, refers to an undisclosed personal relationship that directly impacts the ethical framework of this firm. Specifically, it pertains to a conflict of interest involving a senior partner and the spouse of a subordinate employee. I then displayed the email exchange, carefully redacted to protect Jessica's full name, but leaving enough context to make the connection unmistakable. The subject line, the casual intimacy, the winking emoji, all laid bare. This email, sent from the personal account of my wife, Jessica, to Mr. Robert Sterling, further corroborates the nature and duration of this undisclosed relationship. It explicitly references a penthouse and a secret, indicating a clear breach of both professional conduct and personal trust. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the rustle of papers as partners shifted uncomfortably. Robert, now slumped in his chair, looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His carefully constructed facade had shattered, revealing the hollow man beneath. His eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief, darted from the screen to me, then to the other partners, searching for an ally, a way out. There was none. The implications are clear, I continued, my voice unwavering. This constitutes a severe violation of our firm's ethics policy regarding conflicts of interest, particularly those involving power dynamics within the organization. It compromises not only the integrity of the individuals involved, but also the reputation of Stone Go. Well, I concluded by presenting a meticulously compiled dossier outlining the timeline of their affair, cross-referencing Robert's travelogues with Jessica's, and highlighting instances where their relationship could have influenced corporate decisions. It was a cold, hard indictment, presented with the precision of a legal brief. I watched as the senior partners, their faces a mixture of shock and grim understanding, turned their gazes from the screen to Robert. The air crackled with the unspoken verdict. His career, his reputation, his carefully cultivated image, all were crumbling before their eyes. He was no longer the powerful senior partner. He was a liability, a scandal waiting to explode. My own reaction was a profound stillness. There was no triumph, no exultation, just a quiet, deep satisfaction. The raw, vulnerable pain I had felt weeks ago was gone, replaced by a sense of profound liberation. I had sought justice, not revenge, and I had achieved it with a cold, calculated precision that mirrored the betrayal itself. I watched Robert being escorted out of the boardroom by HR, his shoulders slumped, his once commanding presence reduced to that of a defeated man. His empire, built on deceit, had fallen. Later that day, I received a call from Jessica. Her voice was a broken whisper, a torrent of apologies and desperate pleas. I listened, my heart utterly devoid of emotion. The woman on the other end of the line was a stranger, a ghost of a past life. "I'm sorry, Michael. Please," she choked out. "It was a mistake. I love you." I simply hung up. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to feel. The connection had been severed, cleanly and irrevocably. Weeks turned into months. I left Stone Go, not with a bang, but with a quiet dignity. The firm, eager to contain the scandal, offered a generous severance package, which I accepted without a word. The corporate world, once my ambition, now felt like a distant memory, a stage where I had played a role and then exited. I moved to a new city, a place where the skyline was different, the faces unfamiliar. I started my own consulting firm, specializing in risk assessment and corporate ethics. A grim irony, perhaps, but one that resonated with my newfound clarity. My apartment was minimalist, clean lines, uncluttered spaces, no framed photos of a past life. I often found myself standing by the window, looking out at the new city, its lights a tapestry of anonymous lives. The view was different, but the sense of peace was profound. I was free. Free from the lies, free from the pretense, free from the emotional entanglement that had nearly consumed me. The man who discovered that email was gone, replaced by someone colder, sharper, infinitely more aware. I had learned the hard way that trust was a currency and betrayal, a debt that always came due. The past was a lesson, not a burden. I had walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but forged anew. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by an unshakable resolve. The quiet man who had once been easily deceived was now a silent force, a master of his own destiny.